Hello there, welcome to Inquiring Minds. My name is Doug and I'm back with another Pen Resurrection Sunday video. Today is Sunday, and yesterday I went to my Calgary Pen Club and our Grand Imperial Poobah, Murray, handed me these two vintage pen and pencil sets and asked if I could restore them for him. So we're going to look at these two very interesting Canadian-made World War II era pen and pencil sets, one from Parker and one from Watermans, both made in Canada. The Parker was made in Toronto. The Watermans was made in Montreal, both around 1940. Let's take a look at the pens, talk about them a little bit, and look to see what needs to be done to them. So let's get started with that right now. So let's take a look at the sets one at a time. Let's look at the Parker set. This is in the original leather case. Lots of wear on it. You can just see the gold foil press in it. It says Parker Active Service Set. Now, my research tells me that this was a Canadian thing by Parker Canada, a promotion kind of thing to take advantage of the war effort and to send your soldier boy off to war with a pen and pencil set so they could write you from the front. Let's look at the pencil first. You can see that the pencil has the old style Parker clip. This is from the 1930s, and this color was called black and green pearl. The pencil is in good shape. It actually is turned to extend and retract. There's no eraser on it, but those are available, and a place for some pencil leads. You can see how thick that celluloid was back in the 1930s. And here's the pen. Now, this is a Parker Duofold, and the design and the Parker Duofold dates back to the 1930s. And I know what you're saying, well, this was a World War II pen, and that's because it's Canadian. Parker stopped making the Parker Duofold in 1933 from their plant in Janesville, Wisconsin. But production continued in Canada and the UK. And this was the Toronto factory. You can barely see this, but it says G.O.S. Parker Duofold Jr., Toronto, Canada, and has part of a banner left in there. A couple lines between Toronto and Canada. So it is a Parker Duofold Jr. in the same celluloid as the pencil, called black and green pearl. You can see that the barrel has been discolored over the years. That's because of that desiccated sac that's in there that's stained that celluloid from the inside out. Undo the cap and see. Cap has 3 gold bands on it, and the clip says Pat Sep 516. That was typical on these clips for a long, long time. So it doesn't mean it's 1916. And here is the section and the nib. And this nib has ink on it because Murray had dip tested it. So I haven't touched it since Murray provided it to me. And this nib says Parker Duofold Pen, Canada. And there's the letter B under Canada, and the rest of the nib is buried in the section. So I'm expecting it might say 14K in there somewhere. It might have a date code on it, I'm not sure. The nib looks to be in good shape, and that's that typical ebonite Christmas tree kind of feed that they had in these Parker Duofolds back in the 30s. So these pens were made in Canada up through and including the late of 1940s. This is definitely a World War II made Parker Duofold pen and pencil set, junior, and sold to Canadian troops to go overseas. It is a button filler. You unscrew the cap and you press on the button. It deflects the pressure bar, which pushes on the latex sac inside the pen. It's fairly squishy in there, so I'm not sure what we'll find inside. So what we need to do is get that section off, inspect the inside of the barrel. We can take these parts out and see how corroded they are. The button looks to be in good shape, and that pressure bar is that same brass material. So I'm hoping it's in good shape as well. If so, once we get that section off, we can knock out that feed and nib, polish it up, resack the pen, and put it all back together again. There's nothing you can do about the discoloration. That just happens on these old celluloid pens. We'll polish both of them up, all the gold and the celluloid, and get it looking all brand new again. This pencil doesn't need any work on it, just cleaning out. So that's the Duofold set. Beautiful vintage material here. That leather is so old, it feels like cloth. And then we come to the Waterman's service set. Of course, Waterman's was doing the same thing as Parker in Canada. These were made in Montreal, at the Ideal factory in Montreal. And this pen and pencil set is in this beautiful blue. And this is a Waterman's Starlet. Now, some of you may recognize this because I was just working on a Waterman Stalwart, which is in identical color to this one. The clip is in better shape on the Stalwart than on the Starlet. This one's slightly bent, but in that video I showed you when I was cleaning this, that clip broke, and that's a rivet. And I glued the whole thing back together again, and it's holding fast. Let's take a look at the nib on this Starlet. It's a very small, one size gold nib that says Waterman's Ideal 14KT Canada 1S on it. Doesn't say 14 karat gold anywhere, but that is 14 karat gold. And there's the ebonite feed. Let's compare it to my Stalwart here, and you can see that the Stalwart has a gold 2A stub nib. So this has some scratching and wear on it. It does say Waterman's made in Canada on the barrel, and should say, and it doesn't. The cap does not say anything. The cap on my Stalwart has Waterman's, the other way, has Waterman's made in Canada on the cap as well. So what's the difference between a Stalwart and a Starlet? There's differences in the naming between US and Canada, but in Canada, the Stalwart has 2 cap bands and the Starlet had 1 cap band, but they're almost identical other than that. So that nib seems to be in really good shape, so we're going to try to get that section off. We'll need to heat that off and replace the sac. Seems to be springy in there, so it might have been replaced already. I don't know. We'll find out. And let's look at the pencil here for a second. The pencil in the same blue material has a much better clip. All the gold plating is on that, and it has an imprint on the barrel that says Waterman's made in Canada, stamped into the front. Nothing on the barrel. And this is not a twist to extend with the cap. This you twist by holding on to the nose of the pencil, and the lead comes out. Both Parker and Waterman used 1mm leads. However, this one doesn't retract. It goes out, but it doesn't come back. That might be because I haven't got a really good lead in there. We'll find out. We can probably take that apart. Take this off. There is an eraser, but you can see that bit doesn't turn. Oh, we have some leads in there as well. Again, a really lovely Waterman's Serviceman's set with the original leather case. So I think what we'll do is we'll start with the Waterman's and we'll move to the Parker. So the first thing we have to do with the Starlet is put it in a bath of pen flush in an ultrasonic cleaner. The pen flush is 90% distilled water and 10% ammonia. You can make it yourself. So let's do that. That will help get rid of some of that old ink in there and help release that section as well. So the first thing I find out after taking this out of the bath is that it had a lot of ink in the cap, and it has a sac in it that expels and sucks up ink. So there is a latex sac in there that's obviously been replaced, because if it was as old as the pen, it would not be functioning. So now that I've got a lot of that old ink out of there, I'm going to try to remove this nib and section. Do it without adding any heat to begin with, and it comes out. A little bit of gripper material, and let's see whether it's going to twist. Yeah, it's stuck in there. That happens, it sticks to the lever, and we'll have to replace that sac. Now that I've twisted it out of shape, there we go. But it was functioning, but it's good to, and it might look like it's a little big. Yeah, it was a little bit big. So whoever put that in there, put it all the way to the end, and it might be an oversized sac. So maybe that's why it was sticking so much. You can see where the pressure bar pressed into that latex sac. Now that we've got it out, I can inspect the barrel with my inspection camera and see that the lever seems to be in pretty good shape. So the cap and the barrel, you can't do anything about that clip. I might be able to straighten a bit, but I'm worried about snapping it off since those corrode, and worry about twisting it a bit. We'll see if I can straighten it without breaking it. But we'll polish up that cap and we'll polish up that celluloid barrel and get it all looking like new, like this one. Looks like brand new. And we'll just peel this old sack off of here. Get the remnants of that old sack off, and we'll clean up that nipple to accept a new number 16 size latex sack, because that's what these Waterman lever fillers took, was a number 16. A lot of old sack on top of that one, so someone just put the new sack on top of the old one, because that's desiccated sack that's still there from the last one. There, now we can knock out this feed and get at that nib to polish it up, clean that out, and resack the pen. We'll get out our Bill's block, find the right hole for it. Finding the right hole is always an important part. And then the right rod for that hole. And that one looks like it's the one. Get ourselves some height. Get out our small hammer. Line that up. And tap out the feed. That rings like a bell. And there we are. Thank you, Bill. Lots of old ink in there. And there's the nib. No other date codes on it. Waterman didn't date code these, especially in Canada. It's just a 1S. I don't know what the S stands for, but it looks like a fairly medium nib. And the tines look very good. So I'm going to soak all these parts again in some pen flush. Let them sit for a few minutes, and then we'll polish up that nib. Okay, so the parts are out of the bath, and the ebonite feed is nice and clean. I'll polish that up with some polishing compound to get it all nice and shiny where the feed is visible. We'll polish up the ebonite section as well. I've also run some 400 grit flexible sandpaper around that nipple to roughen it up and get any old sack or shellac off of there. And the nib came up almost brand new, but I'm going to polish that with my jeweler's cloth. But I wanted to show you the difference in the sack. Here's a number 16 size sack. That is standard for the Waterman lever fillers, celluloid lever fillers. And this is the sack that came from it. See the difference just in the thickness. This looks like an 18 or a 17 sack, much too large for that small pen. So we'll put the proper one in and cut it to length, and then we'll shellac a new one on with my shellacker pen. But let's get out a jeweler's cloth and see what we can do to shine up this nib. And that's after about a minute of polishing right there. So I'll do that some more to get out some of those micro scratches, and then we'll resack the pen. There, now I've polished up the section with some polishing compound, and that feed is really shiny now. Look at that. And the nib is just like new. Beautiful gold nib. So now we're going to put the nib and feed back in the section. Now we sort of twist it around to find out where it wants to live, because it probably lived in that position for 80 some odd years. Get that nib aligned where it was. Give the whole thing a good push. That looks pretty good. That feed is extended slightly out the back. Just going to push it down a little bit more. There we go. Just so that it's aligned properly. So now we can cut this sack to size. The section is going to sit right about there. And so that sack wants to live right about to the top of those threads. So about there. And that will still keep it up from the bottom of the pen. The other one went right to the bottom and was kind of snagged in there as well. So I'm going to trim that off just about the top of the threads. So right there. So put our sack spreader on there. Put it on the end of the nipple just for a dry run. And we want to put a little talc on that latex sack to make sure that it slides nicely, and also that it doesn't react with the inside of the celluloid barrel or with that lever pressure bar. So we'll put the lever bar up, the nib up, and press the whole thing home. And there we go, resacked. Now I'm not going to do anything to that section just yet. I'm going to dip test that nib to make sure that it's working correctly so I don't have to pull the sack off if I need to knock that feed out again. So we're going to do a quick dip test of this nib. I could have done this before cleaning it up, but might as well have it clean while we're doing our dip test. And that's not a test to make sure that you're not a dip, it's to make sure that the nib works okay. So this should be a 1940s Waterman Starlet. And this looks to be about a fine to a medium. It's got quite a bit of scratch to it. Let's see about line variation. Ooh, it's nicely bouncy. It's railroading on me because it's not getting any ink because I'm dipping it. Look at that. It's got some nice bounce to it. I'll check it again with my loop. See whether I missed anything the first time. Yeah, it's misaligned. After I push that nib back into the section again, it's misaligned a little bit more than it was originally. So we'll just do a slight adjustment on that. And I just got this really cool tool from Pentooling. It's this pair of nib pliers that have really fine jaws on them for gripping each side of a tine and adjusting them slightly. So I'm going to put my eyes on here. There's a little built-in light, and I'm going to see about just adjusting that slightly. I'll do that off camera. Okay, so that needs more adjustment than I can do with the feed intact. So I'm going to pull that whole thing out again. We're going to take the sack off because it hasn't been shellacked on, and we're going to knock it out of the feed again, and then I'll adjust it that way. So we're going to do this again, find that sweet spot where the nib wants to live, and give it a push. It still went a little long, and now the feed is misaligned. So back and forth we go. There, feed's aligned. Let's check the tines. Pretty good. I'm going to put it back in the pen without the sack because I'm just going to dip test it again and see whether it's any better. 1940s Waterman's Starlet. Lots of flex. Very wet. Still a little bit scratchy, but those tines are aligned and I can polish that with some micro mesh to get it nice and smooth. So we'll resack this now. So we get out our shellac pen and our sack spreader, and we do this for real this time. Dial up a little bit of shellac. Give our sack a spread and give it a twist. Make sure it's nice and straight. It's sliding off of there. Look at that. Maybe there's a little bit too much shellac. Here we go, seems to be staying now. So we'll let that dry, and I'll put another bead of shellac around it just to check, make sure there's no leaks. And now we can go after polishing up the barrel and the cap with some sandpaper and micro mesh to get all those gouges out. There's a nice one right there. I don't know if you can see that or not. Well, we'll sand that out with some 400 grit. Okay, here's the cap all polished up, and it looks a hell of a lot better than it did. Here's the barrel. It's still in the matte version from the 400 grit, but I'll do the same treatment to this. I went through all the steps of the micro mesh with the cap from 1500 through to 12,000, and then followed up with some Meguiar's Swirl Remover #2 polishing compound and buffed it up to a nice shine. Now all that gold plating has already gone from that, but that cap band alone, it was a gold originally, but look how nice and shiny that is now. So let's do the barrel next. And there we go, all polished up. Cap and barrel. Unfortunately, there was a gouge right through the middle of the Waterman's imprint, and I didn't want to erase the Waterman's imprint, so the gouge stays. But, you know, it's an 85-year-old pen, so it's going to have some scars. So now we just have to wait for that sack to dry, and we'll put it back in the pen and we'll do a writing sample. So now that I have both the pencil and the fountain pen polished up to like a new shine, the clip on that pencil came up very, very nicely. Of course, that's what this clip on the fountain pen used to look like before all the gold disappeared. Well, let's give this fountain pen a test. And this is a Waterman's Starlet, and it has a 14 karat gold. I'd say this is a medium nib. Let's check the wetness. Very, very wet. Some good line variation. It looks like about 0.5 to 0.6 millimeters, something like that. A nice vintage writer. And it could stand with a little bit more polishing. It's got a little bit of a scratch that way, but otherwise a very, very nice pen. So now we're going to look at the Parker Duofold Junior service set, pen and pencil. We'll look at the pencil later. Let's look at this Duofold. I want to get that section off, see if there's a sack in there, what kind of condition the inside of the barrel is. I expect, because of that discoloration, there's some desiccated sack in there. The nib looks great. I've dip tested it, and it feels like a medium. It's very smooth, but we want to get it out of that section, clean up the feed, clean up the nib, and possibly resack it. Well, I'm sure we'll resack it. There are some gouges out of some of the ebonite. There's some scratches. The cap isn't too bad. The clip is nice. There are some gouges out of the section that need to be polished out, and lots of wear, of course, and a barely discernible imprint. And there's a flag, former flag or a banner in there somewhere. The only banner I can remember looking like that said Lucky Curve, which was the shape of the feed on these. So once we get this open, we'll see. And of course, there's lots of chewing or something on that blind cap, which comes off easily, and we'll find out whether there's some sack in there. So we're going to heat this section off with my heat gun. I'm going to heat it a little bit because we worry about that celluloid melting, and it comes right off. Oh, and the sack is stuck in there. Actually, the sack is in pretty good shape, but that barrel is in desperate need of cleaning inside and out. I'm going to go at it with my inspection camera, turn it on and go down the barrel and see what we can see. Take the blind cap off so I can push on the mechanism, see if it works. The pressure bar here. Now the pressure bar pushes up against the top of the section, so it might not actually work here, but it'll show if it's intact. And I can actually withdraw that whole mechanism out of there once we get this. There we go. Once we get that brass push button off, then we can remove the whole thing. And it's in excellent shape. There's no corrosion on that at all. That's just going to need some cleaning. And now we've got the barrel free. We can clean it out, inside and out. Well, while we're at it, we're cooking with gas here, not the pencil. There we go. See if we can get this end finial off. These generally came off fairly easily. Yeah, came off very easily. Didn't need any heat at all. The cap finial held the clip in place, but also act as a nib seal as well. So there we go. We got all of our pieces together. Got the pressure bar, the clip, blind cap, and they're all going to take a bath for a while in some pen flush. So I've been working away on Murray's Slender Junior fountain pen and pencil set. I've cleaned up both the pencil and the fountain pen cap, barrel, clip, and finials. I've had it all in pieces, and it's now shining like new. Beautiful, especially that clip. Look how gorgeous that is. Lots of polishing. The same thing on the pencil. Beautiful. And I've got the guts all in pieces. So here's the section. It had a lot of gunk still on the back. And I wanted you to see this section because it's oval. So someone's applied some heat to it to try to get that nib out previously, maybe. And that's why it's sort of slumped into this oval. So I took some photographs of it before I knocked the nib out with the feed, so I'd know which orientation it wants to go in when I return it to the section. But I'm going to polish that section up a little bit first. The pressure bar came out, and it's in gorgeous shape. Beautiful. The brass button that goes on the end is in really good shape. I'm going to clean that up with some metal polish. And here is the feed. It's not a Lucky Curve feed at all. It's the standard sort of Christmas tree feed that you saw in these 1940s Duofolds. Ebonite, of course, and I've polished it all up really, really nicely. But the barrel still says Lucky Curve on it. Now, you can barely see it. You probably can't see it at all, but there's a banner in there. But there's a banner in there that says Lucky Curve. That was just part of their logo at the time. And I think Canada continued to use that impression long after maybe the US stopped doing it. I know that Janesville stopped making these pens in the early 30s. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to replace that sack with the same sack that came out of it, because I pulled it off. It was just barely hanging on there anyway. When I soaked the section, it kind of fell off. There's a little bit of that old shellac there, right in there on that section that I can scrape off. But the sack is in really, really good shape. It just wasn't attached to the section very well anymore. So I'm going to clean that up. We're going to resack this pen with the same sack. I'm going to polish up the metal so it's ready to be reinstalled. And we're going to take a look at this nib first before I polish it up. Here it is in all its glory. This is exactly how it came out of the pen after some pen flush and sitting in that pen flush bath for a while. It says Parker Duofold Pen, Canada, and then there's a B under Canada. So I'm not sure what that B stands for. I don't think it stands for broad. It might, but this, I tested this nib before I took it out, and it writes beautifully. It's a medium, but it's got quite a downturn on it. Some of these nibs back in the day were turned down like that because they were manifold nibs, meaning that they will take a little bit more pressure, so you can make copies or manifold copies through carbon paper. But there's also a little bit of a hump in there too. But since the nib writes beautifully and is nicely wet and everything, I'm not going to adjust that at all. But I am going to polish it up. I'm going to use some micro mesh on it first, some 6,000 and then 8,000 and then 12,000. And then I'm going to use my jeweler's polishing cloth, and we're going to get that polished up as nicely and as brightly as we can. So I've got the brass button and the pressure bar in the ultrasonic bath with pen flush. I polished it up with metal cleaner first. So we're going to try to put this nib back into the section again. So we're going to line that feed up as best as it can. Get some gripper material here. And I have the photo of the section the way it was before I pulled the nib up on my computer. So I'm going to take a look to see on the section where that orientation of that nib, because there are some gouges out at the top of the section. I'm going to try to align them the same way. The nib was in this way. I'm going to try to push it in that way. Doesn't want to go. So I'm going to sand this down a little bit. This ebonite, it ends up being a really nice lubricant when you sand it down. A little bit of ebonite dust. And we'll try this again. Fitting a round peg into a square hole. Only seems to be one way that that feed wants to go in. Well, I might have to heat that and get that feed in there while I'm heating it and try to reshape around that feed, because that round peg does not want to go into that oval hole with the nib on it. Now I'm going to try to heat the section and put it in while the section's still warm. Okay, by heating it, I got the nib and the feed to go in at least. There, and it's all the way at the back of the section. Is it aligned? Yes. There, get my fingerprints off it, and there it is. Excellent. Now we can test fit this sack on that section. I always like to do a dry run before I do the real thing to make sure it will fit. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Now we need to get the hardware out of the bath. So there's the button. The brass button looking very, very shiny and new. And I'm really impressed with how this pressure bar looks after so many years. So we can take the blind cap off and we can fit our pressure bar down inside. And the pressure bar, well, I might have to, yeah, it looks a bit bent. So I'm going to bend that over a little bit more to make sure it hangs onto that collar. Just straighten it out a little bit. It should hang on the back of that threaded collar right there and be slightly flat. That's a little bit better. And then the button fits on top of that shaft and presses against the collar to hold it in. The top part of that pressure bar pushes up against the bottom of the section. Just get a little bit of talc on here just for our test fit. And now we have to thread the sac down between the pressure bar and the wall. That little tail right there has to be between that tip of that pressure bar and the wall. So between here and there, so that it presses the sac aside. There. Now when you press down on it, it'll deflect that bar and squeeze the sac. And once the nib is writing well, then I'll permanently put that sac on with some shellac and we'll fill it up with ink. Okay, so I'm just going to dip test this nib. I already tested it before I did all this work. This is a 1940s Parker Duofold. It is a slender junior, which is 4 5/8 inches long. It's very, very wet. Has a good amount of feedback, and it might indeed be a broad nib. Look at that. Some line variation. Yeah. What a beautiful writer. I think Murray is going to be pleased with this. Boy, it really wants you to do some swoopy letters. What a beautiful pen. So now that I know that nib is writing very, very nicely, we're going to resack this pen with the original sack it came with, which is in really, really good shape. There's no remnants of shellac on it here at all, which is unusual. It just sort of fell off. It's like whoever put it on really didn't use any shellac. There was some old shellac in around that collar, and I chipped all that away. So let's shellac it for real. Make it stay this time. Get out my shellac pen and just draw just enough to seal the sac. Never remember whether I'm right-handed or left-handed when I do this. Okay, so don't want any shellac on the end. That's bad. We don't want that channel filling up with shellac or ink won't flow. There we go. Give it a little bit of a twist. I'm going to put a little bit of shellac around the outside as well, just to guard against any leaks. Then we'll let that dry. And once it's dry, we'll put it back into the pen, and then we'll do another writing sample. So here we are with the previous writing sample. 1940s Parker Duofold, slender junior. Again, this is a 4 5/8 inch pen when capped, which makes it the slender junior. And if anything, it's writing even better now that I've smoothed it out just a touch with some micro mesh. Oh my goodness, this is nice. Very wet, some nice bounce to it, and very thick. So I think this nib is a 0.7 millimeter line, which makes it between a medium and a broad Western nib. Wow, beautiful, beautiful pen. So what are my thoughts about these resurrections? Well, thanks go out to Murray first for providing these two wonderful sets of pens for resurrection, for your edification, and my practice. Both of these sets are in their original cases, and they were made in Canada. And they were made in Canada for servicemen going into World War II. The idea was for servicemen in Canada to take them with them to the front in Europe and write home to their loved ones. The Waterman says service set, the Parker says active service set. I don't know what the distinction is. I don't think they gave these out to the troops. I think these were for purchase for families to give to their soldier boys going off to war. Let's take a look at the Waterman now that they've both been restored. There's the fountain pen and the pencil. Of course, the fountain pen has lost all of its gold on the clip, but otherwise it writes beautifully with a beautifully restored 14 karat gold medium nib. Writes like a dream in that gorgeous marbled blue celluloid. Now let's take a look at the Parker Duofold Slender Junior pen and pencil set, and that gold came up just gorgeous, and it works like brand new. The fountain pen is a real stunner. Of course, that barrel is permanently stained dark over the last 80 years or so of having a sack in it, but that celluloid is just beautiful, and the gold polished up beautifully as well. These clips were not gold plated, they were gold filled, so they're very, very solid. And there's that gorgeous broad 14 karat gold nib. So both of these sets over 80 years old, back writing again like they were brand new and looking like they're brand new as well. So again, thanks Murray for allowing me to work on these pens. You'll see them at our next pen meeting. And there you have it. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to ring that bell to get instant notifications whenever a new video is posted. And you can join as a member of my channel for only 99 cents a month, and you'll get cool emojis, badges, sneak peek unboxing videos, and instant access to my videos the moment I post them. So when I have restored pens for sale, as a member of my channel, you'll get an opportunity to purchase them days in advance of everyone else. Another incentive for spending 99 cents a month. And I thank you for your support. And that just leaves it for me to say, thank you for watching. And that's all she wrote.